Hello, I am Merril Gilbert. I am the co-founder and CEO of Trace Trust, and I am here as part of the leadership of WEIC. And today I'm excited about another episode of Inside Ops. And I have my good friend and colleague, Colleen King, here. And we are going to be discussing the world of supply chain since it is affecting so much of our lives on a daily basis. But we're going to get into a different way of looking at this. Obviously, we are in California, so our point of view is very much associated with what's going on here, but it does affect the bigger legal market as a whole. And I'm very excited to just introduce Colleen because I want her to tell us a little bit about herself and her current role because she's come from, like myself, food and beverage into cannabis. We've been doing this about the same amount of time, but recently in the last year has gotten involved in the tech side of things. So, Colleen, welcome.
Thank you so much. My background is interesting. Like you said, it comes from food and beverage. I was actually born in a predominantly Amish community and an Irish labor coal mining community. And so I always knew that I wanted to work in um, food, agriculture, and activist organizing. And so I actually started in the coffee industry where I was working at a cafe. During college, and they were pioneering the direct trade model, which is something that you see on some packaging nowadays in the specialty side. But they were the first ones to really create um, the framework around it and then allow it to scale. And so once I understood what they were doing and what the sourcing world really looked like, I just jumped right in. And so for 10 years, I was sourcing coffee in remote communities in 11 countries and connecting growers with high quality buyers that understood their value. And so really sort of setting up value chains for smallholder farmers. And in the last 6 years, I've been consulting in the space. And I was so lucky to meet you, Merrill. And I have been basically trying to figure out a way to bring equity to the chain as it gets delivered to the regulatory space. And so it's been really interesting to be able to look at it from a technology lens because I never would have thought that technology would have been something that I would have been working in because I'm so advocate for being in person. My last job, I was working, traveling half of the year to be able to be in person with these farmers. And I still think that's really important. But when we build technology that has equitable solutions and transparency built in, it really allows it to scale and to be the foundation of what we're building. And I think one of the coolest things about building this right now is that in these other industries, in cocoa and coffee, in tea, those are 150-year-old systems that were set up with colonial models. And so they inherently have this power struggle. And so it's very difficult to make any large change within that space. So you can look at it sort of on a micro scale, which is also very valuable. But with cannabis, we're creating this now. And so I thought moving into the technology space with a company called Ciclo, we are building transparent, equitable models that can scale for legacy operators.
And just to pop in on that, and what that looks like is you're right now beta testing a new app called Listo, and it really kind of is what you're talking about. Can you just explain? I know we're going to get into a lot of different things, but I think it just before we segue into everything, when we talk about transparency, we talk about real-time transactions and how this affects the entire market. Can you just share a little bit about what this app does?
Yeah, so it's an app that basically connects cultivators with wholesale buyers, and it connects everyone in the chain transparently. So what you have to do is you have to connect your metric API key, and what this does is gives us the ability to have um, visibility and transparency into a previously opaque supply chain. And so I think one of the biggest issues with everyone in the chain is where does my product go? Where is it right now? You hear all these stories about farmers having product returned and they had no idea it had been in LA and moved all around California before coming back to them. And so being able to have more integrity with that transparency allows us to be able to have more trust in the chain and have more price transparency. We've also embedded a way for the sellers, the cultivators, to be able to have a minimum price in there because we're seeing this race to the bottom right now. And so having some of that control and price determination is also a big part of it.
And this benefits cultivators, wholesalers, distributor, retailer, right? Anyone that is licensed to purchasing.
Yeah, exactly. So, in some ways of application, a distributor can use this as their model and be able to have upstream and downstream suppliers be able to use it and streamline all of that. It automates all of your invoices, your POs, all of your real-time tracking. And you can also have, sellers, manufacturers, cultivators control their own relationships and be able to find their buyers and just have someone do transport in between. So it's really interesting to be able to see how different people are using it in the beta.
It's fantastic. And I know we're not here to talk about Ciclo and Listo, but I think it's a wonderful lead into the conversation that we are here to have. And
Yeah.
um, I want to talk about why this conversation is so relevant today and the different perspectives that we bring to this, right? So when I was asked to take over the supply chain group for women employed in cannabis and what that looked like. I had to, talk to our leadership and say, look, this is not just about supply chain. Supply chain is one part of three very key parts of the industry, and that is operations. That is the daily, and I don't care if you're cultivating or again a retailer or a brand or however you interact. We all have daily responsibilities, and we all have people that are responsible to us and are responsible to others. So there's the operational aspect. There is also compliance. What is regulatory, what is future FDA, but to stay and make sure that you're making safe and reliable products, that you have a safe work environment, that you are protecting your investments and your investors. So lots of risk assessment and management that's a big part of this. And so when you and I started talking about having this interview together, I really wanted to use it in this context of how decisions made often affect all these different ways of getting product into the marketplace. And that includes raw materials. So that's packaging and labeling, seeds, fertilizer, like all of the things that happen, manufacturing to get something from ideation to concept to reality to point of sale of purchase. And then what happens after that? Ideally, whoever the end user is going to repeat that process, purchase again. But when something goes wrong, it's the ability to pull that back, find it and locate it. And that is the end result of putting systems in place. But more importantly is when we talk about supply chain today, we have a lot of scenarios that are going on and that are affected not just from the source of a plant to that. It's all of these things that I just mentioned. So as we get into this, I'd love to just get an overview from you of where you think we are right now in California, just the overall state of kind of the industry, the supply chain scenarios, because we talked just moments ago, you mentioned devaluation, right? And just kind of what you're thinking about what we can see today and maybe 6 to 12 months out. What are you just, an overall of where the state is?
Yeah, I mean, I think anybody in California can tell you that the state is pretty dire right now. It's a very difficult environment, no matter where you are in the chain. Um, the price of flower has plummeted, of course, because of oversupply, and really regulatory failures, in my opinion. We're seeing a lot of consolidations. We're seeing people deciding to, some farmers are trying to fallow and trying to figure out how they can legally do that without losing their license because they don't feel like they can plant because prices are so low. The terms that people are giving each other are up to 90 days at some point, being able to pay, and that ripples across all of the supply chains. It's a very difficult space, and I think it's going to probably, unfortunately, remain this way because one of the largest impacts that could relieve this would be the amount of retail outlets. And that in California takes so long to be able to come online that, that solution, even if we decided to open the floodgates right now, we still wouldn't really see that probably for at least 18 months.
So when we think about this, and I think maybe this is just a good segue because we have new members joining our group all the time, right? And they're definitely not only from other states but from other countries. And so when we talk about legacy, I think maybe, and also because you've spent some time in some of these regions and areas, so I think you have a really unique way to present this. But I'd love for you to talk a little bit about legacy, and then in this difference, because people who have heard me speak before know that I feel where our disconnect comes early on in just setting standards around testing. When we focused only on potency levels of THC and CBD, not anything else, no other cannabinoids, terpenes, other ingredients, anything else. We those two things, and then again based on the source materials, that same part of um, contaminants, right? Molds, pesticides, etc. So again, not overall value. And then we also went to market in these new legal adult use. I'm not talking about medical because it's a very different conversation we could go into all day.
Yes.
But that's a very different need. But just in the adult use, we went in still stuck in a very old belief system around a stoner culture, right? So potency, potency, potency. How high am I going to get? And again, not about lifestyle, any types of health and wellness perspectives, social perspectives, price, low end to high end, none of that, even though we're evolving into that, we still have this old belief that's kind of held this. So, talk a little bit about what a legacy means, where it is, um, and then how this, is um, the state of the overall industry, not just in California, but how you see this, how it shows up in these newly licensed states.
It's interesting because the legacy market, when we're talking about it, we're talking about growers and operators that have fought the war on drugs to bring the plant to the people. No matter where you were in the United States, oftentimes you have access to cannabis. It wasn't difficult to get, even in the middle of Pennsylvania, where I grew up in this little rural town. I had access to California cannabis. And so when we talk about legacy and we talk about the traditional market, it's a market that existed and had its own logistics and systems and knowledge, generations of knowledge, oftentimes, in bringing this to the people. And so when you bring in this hyper regulated environment like we have in California, it created a very interesting space where you had growers that were taking a risk based on what the government said that they could do and being able to try to maybe get some market share. And then you had some growers and operators that said, I'm not going to do that. Either I don't trust it or that doesn't make business sense for me. And they continue to grow in that space. What we have right now is a very contentious environment where the traditional market, the legacy market, is actually crashing at the same time as the regulated market in terms of pricing. And part of that is because the other states are coming online and are bringing their legacy or oftentimes large operators into the regulated space and bringing that retail and or having other people moving. For example, there's a lot of growers in California that have left and decided just to go to Oklahoma or other places, New Mexico, that have a little bit easier framework to grow. And so you're seeing these legacy operators either moving, getting out, or trying to get into the regulated space, and it's affecting flower prices. And I think really we need to think about what is the best way to be able to preserve this knowledge and be able to make sure that these people that, when you hear the stories of them being in the Emerald Triangle and having the helicopters and being arrested in a bathrobe and issues with their children being in school, and it's the war on drugs is really real, and these are really the prisoners of war in terms of being able to what do they do now? And I think it's really a moral responsibility for us to support them and be able to figure out how best we can not only preserve their knowledge, but give respect to what they've already gone through for us to get where we are today.
I think also of um, the Last Prisoner project as well, right? Because we have all these social equity policies that are added into these new regulatory bills, but not always well thought out or even really happening, right? Into the true sense. And so, it's frightening to think about that again when we move further east past, again, established states like Colorado and even Arizona and stuff, that we have so many people that are still in prison for something that is legal. And then not to be able to provide this opportunity for those that brought us here, that got us here. It's the same, how did we get to medical? I mean, it was really initiated by the AIDS crisis when these poor people were just suffering in extreme pain, um, with nothing. And then we also see just what's happened with the whole opioid, fentanyl, all synthetic derived pain relief, decimating communities all throughout this country. And so there's so much misunderstanding around this. And to your point, it comes back to the supply chain, because not only do we lose part of this history, but um, even though we're seeing a lot of work in the cloning and genetics of cannabis, what some of those seeds are invaluable,
Yeah,
and they also need
absolutely.
to be protected in the same way. So there's so many issues, and I know we could spend this entire conversation on this topic, but I really wanted to have a lens for where we are and where we're
Yeah,
headed, and that there's
absolutely.
still some pieces of this that need to be acknowledged, addressed, and incorporated into whatever comes next. Because the other side of this that we're seeing when we talk about supply chain are some really big names coming into this. Everything from um, Amazon eventually will be set up to deliver, and we see the big beverage companies that have been dipping their toe in this. We're seeing obviously the bigger brands come in, and we're seeing a lot of merger and acquisitions with crazy valuations. And so when we talk about just this consolidation piece, talk a little bit about, again, issues in California that we're gonna start seeing, because we have throughout the West right now we have serious drought, so we have weather issues that are going to affect supply chain. We have price. Um, we have other outside influences. We have this, basically, people that have licenses trying to get rid of this. So what is that business world? What's happening there? Where is that today? And what is some of the big things that, let's give a little happy news. So what are things that you think could be working, but realistically, let's start with where the pain points are.
Yeah, I mean, the pain points are we're seeing small operators, legacy operators, equity operators really deciding whether or not this makes sense for them to be in this space because they're not supported. And these large brands that come in are they're able to, there's things like buying shelf space. Like, when people are both raising money, you see when a dispensary or a retailer is raising money and a brand is raising money, usually they end up working together. And so there's all of these ways that it's barriers to entry. And it's making it very difficult for operators that have got us here, like we talked about in the legacy space, to be able to survive. And so what we're sort of seeing is, eventually we're probably going to have these small craft operators, and then the really really big guys that you're talking about, and not much in between. And this happens in other spaces, but this is happening at an accelerating and alarming rate in cannabis, and in a regulatory framework where it's very difficult to be able to get to the point where we can have any middle ground or sort of slow down the pace so that people can strategize and work together.
So that opens this piece around what we hope to see some point when we get some national um, direction and hopefully legalization and access to interstate commerce, right? So, one, right now, you can't carry any cannabis state to state, no matter what format it's in. You can do some CBD, but again, that's not going to go through a state licensed cannabis program. And um, and with that in mind, you have um, the opportunity, though, to maybe create that value, right? Is that what we will eventually see? Because what we do produce here can't really be replicated. I mean, it's our terroir, it's our sun, it's it's all of these things, right, that make these unique flower plants. So, do you think that's the possibility that kind of like you have Champagne, that's only from Champagne, France, you have Napa Valley, designated appellations? Do we see
Yeah.
that on the horizon?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the Appalachian program is in the works, and the Origins Council has done amazing work. If anyone is interested in any of this, I highly recommend following the work that they do. The growing communities. Part of my job is going into the growing regions and meeting with these, trade groups and seeing, what are the most pressing issues. And they are, very excited to be able to say, this is where I grow and this is what's unique about what I do. And it's a really beautiful thing that they are able to shape that. And that goes back to the whole, colonial models of other trades. We are one of the really bright things that's happening right now is growers are going to be able to shape what this looks like, and their own regions, and what does it mean to grow on this hillside in this watershed. And that's a really beautiful thing. And I think once interstate commerce happens, the value of those flowers are going to skyrocket. And for a lot of people, it's just about holding on to be able to get to that point where their value is understood. And I think in California, we often take for granted the quality of flower until you travel somewhere else. You realize, wow, the quality here is just amazing, and it's so evident of the genetics and the wisdom and the knowledge that's passed down to be able to get us there, in addition to the sun, the soil, and the terroir that we're talking about. So I'm very hopeful for that. But even when we talk about interstate commerce, we're still talking about more regulatory frameworks, right? There's going to have to be more pivots that are going to have to happen in order to have the interstate commerce. And when we're talking about FDA, that is also going to change what is going to be required. And so I think I want to be a little bit cautiously optimistic about that road, but I am very confident that the value is going to skyrocket.
And there could be some combination of not just FDA but DEA, right? Because
Yeah.
at some point they're going to have to address um, consumption in a manner like alcohol. So some of that
Mm-hmm.
framework will carry over. But I also um, see on the FDA, it's, again, what's safe to consume either internally or externally on your skin, right? We still don't have a lot of guidance on what that looks like. So these are, one of the other things that we see too that's very interesting now, and I think you might have mentioned this too, because it's also all aspects of our industry, is the whole cryptocurrency being used. And I'm not expecting you to give us um, a tutorial um, on that whole, but what does that look like? Is that something that, why are we seeing that all of a sudden pop up, and where do we think is going to go from there?
Yeah, I mean, the crypto space is really exciting, right? Because again, a new framework, a new way to do business, new solutions. And I think, the banking issues with cannabis have been so detrimental to the ability to be able to just operate, that it is being looked at as a solution because there's really no other way. It's very interesting to think about, if you take banking out of it, what does that look like? If we can stabilize a coin and be able to trade it, does that, the banking issue mostly go away in terms of blockchain and traceability? all of those things, compliance, being able to prove taxes, being able to calculate it. There's all of these things that can be really hopeful when we think about transferring to more crypto model. Of course, there's a lot of things we need to learn about. What does that look like in practice? What are the real risks here? We're already talking about people that are taking a lot of risk and are under a lot of pressure. So you want to be really careful about that. But Listo, the trade platform that we're working on, we are going to accept crypto, and so that's something that I'm learning about and very hopeful about. And so I'm hoping that we have more education on this space. We can have more dialogues about it and see, because I'm all about building, now is the time for solutions. The industry is in crisis and everyone needs to find ways to be able to survive and get through. And so I'm all about trying new things as long as the risk is low enough for the community.
That's a great thought around that, because I think when people think about crypto, they don't always know the fact that it can be traced to this blockchain solution, which in, again, any part of the supply chain becomes a fantastic tool. Where did it originate? How did it get here? Where did it end up? And as we address our business needs more on a database, I mean, there's a human element, right? Customer service is still customer service. Um,
Yeah.
but there is, when we have abilities to make real-time decisions about our business, we are smarter, right? The more, I mean, as challenging people find compliance to be and regulatory oversight to be, it makes our industry stronger and safer. And as you know, I mean, it's a big part of what Trace Trust stands for, right? We stand for uniting this industry as a whole, nationally and internationally, to be treated like all other industries. And
Yeah.
everywhere else we have this, right? But this is this emerging industry, again, trying to overcome this old negative drug culture versus its potential as a plant, as medicine, as an ingredient, and all the things that feed into that at any given moment. So that's my little soapbox part of this. But I think that, what I'm trying to get to is, what are some of the other things that we're going to see here with the supply chain right now? Like, if we are particularly packaging, right, has become a big thing. So often, we think back 2 years ago before COVID, and everybody was like, "Oh, I can't wait to launch my brand," and I like got these great designs for all this wonderful um, tins and glass and everything that was all coming from another country, and those days are gone. I mean, do we see a rise in eco-friendly? What do we see going to happen here in the country through this next, several months? What can we plan for? What are some of those, knowledgeable things that you bring um, with you to think about expertise in planning and suggesting and, things maybe we should avoid?
Yeah. So, I mean, as far as, when you look at the global supply chain, I think one thing when people say, when they talk to me about, I'm setting up my brand and I'm setting up my packaging, and you're right, there's so much enthusiasm around that, and there should be. But I think one of the most important things that you can ask your supplier is, who's their supplier? Entering into transparent relationships in every form of your supply chain is essential, because a lot of these companies look like they might print stateside. Most of them do not. It's actually, I think there's maybe two companies in the cannabis space that print, even have printers stateside, and it's not they're not set up for the volume that it's needed to for right now. When you look at it globally, there are countries that are not having the issues that we're having. Mexico does not have issues with their factories getting bottles. They're having a skyrocket in building more because they have more demand, but they're not having issues on these imports. So the United States in particular is having a lot of impact in these trade issues with China. And so we are seeing that sort of hit every aspect of the cannabis supply chain. And so I would say another thing would be going in on with glass with other people. So, if you're a small operator, who else we all buy the same kind of things to be able to label. If you need, eighth jars, somebody else is also trying to source those eighth jars. So being able to go in on it together. if that feels comfortable with that partner, I think is another really important step. Um, but otherwise, I do think that eco packaging is something that we can move towards. I'm hopeful. I don't think it's happening as fast as I was anticipating it, and I think that this supply chain issue probably people are pivoting. Just like with the gas prices, people are like, maybe I'll buy an electric car now. You need that demand in order to have that push, and so I'm hoping that those solutions are being developed right now, because we do have a major issue with packaging and plastic. And so I think that with all the other things that we can revolutionize in this space, that's one that we can have a large impact, because before we didn't have this much waste. We created it, and that was part of the regulations. And so we need to be able to pivot and be responsible with that supply chain in particular.
Colleen, we were talking about um, the legacy in the corporate world, how they're merging, where we're going in this future. We have this part that once we come from the the plant to the next step of processing, it all enters into a distribution system, and the distribution system has many facets to it. And then we have delivery, right? Delivery is not just when I think because now for 2 years we've been having things delivered in so many different ways. We don't think about the delivery of delivery into distribution, delivery into the supply chain, delivery, right? We just think about, oh, I ordered something that's going to be delivered to my house or my office. We're not thinking about it. So where are we in this, and where are we going? Um, and what is that relationship between distribution and delivery?
I want to make sure I understand this question.
Tell me what you think I said, and we'll include
The
this because
relationship
this is part of
between,
the conversation.
yeah.
Yeah,
So
so
you're talking,
legacy, yeah, getting stuff from point A to point B is one part of that, but it's getting it. Distribution is an interesting word, because they're really people that just move things in and out, right? They get it from point A, they take it to point B, and then from point B it can go C, D, E, F, right? They are that. Oftentimes, I think in a brand and in a business mentality, they think they're also part of their sales force, which usually is not the case because they're only concerned in how much can I put on this truck or vehicle to move from here to there to make it efficient, to make it better. So if they are going to maybe talk about your products and your brands, you're probably one of hundreds of other items that they're carrying. And so that's the distribution piece of this. But then delivery is, again, picking it up, getting it delivered to the distribution, delivery from distribution to the retailers or to another, outlet, to the manufacturer, to picking up from the man. So delivery is not about just placing an order and getting it to my home, right? When we're talking about it in the context of operations and supply chain, where are we at, what's working, and where are we going to go in the future with improvement?
yeah, I mean, I think, distribution is it has the most power in the chain, in my opinion. I mean, retail has a lot of power of what it's putting on shelves and being that access point. But distribution has so many touch points. They collect taxes. They're often involved in the sales. They are in the transport, the COAs, inventory. It's a lot, and so I think that distributors kind of get a bad rap because they have a lot of trouble operating in all of those spaces and doing it well in this difficult environment. Um, and there's definitely a lot of improvement that can happen, especially in terms of visibility into what's going on with products with distributors, which is why we focused Listo on distributors and visibility. I think when we talk about delivery, delivery models are I think that they're the future in a lot of ways because we're so used to being able to order online. I think it would be the fastest way for us to be able to have more outlets to be able to reach consumers. And we're seeing really innovative models, for example, with the Mendocino, I think, Producers Guild, being able to work with a delivery license in Sacramento to be able to kind of do direct sales. And so there's all these innovative ways that we can do when we link distribution to delivery services. And I am hopeful that we can build that out and create education around it. I think right now the transit and the transport is very strained. We have drivers that are driving really long hours all the way up and down the state. We have these hubs, which are targets for robberies because they're moving the products in and out. And they know that we're an all cash business. And, it's something that is a major issue where some people are deciding to get out because of that. I have friends that have lived in their distribution facilities because it was necessary and been robbed while they are there living in it. I mean, it's creating a lot of tension within the space. And so I think that when we think about getting cannabis delivered to our door, there is so much more to that chain. And as far as what's working, I think the technology, things like what Ciclo is doing, is helping to be able to create more of that trust and visibility. I think what's not working is not communicating with your partners, not having enough of the practices that we talk about that come from oftentimes outside of cannabis, of inventory recons, being able to trace everything, proper invoicing, being able to saying that you can do more than what you can do. Is another thing that I see happen a lot. And sometimes most of the time, a brand unfortunately has to take it on themselves to be able to sell themselves and market themselves in order to really get on that shelf and be able to move more product. And so I think being realistic about where we're at and also hopeful about the models that are emerging right now is a balance that we really need to strike while leveraging technology.
Colleen, we just came out of this conversation around distribution and delivery and where we're headed, where we are, where we're headed, and parts of that. One area that we have not focused on other than retailers making decisions about what's going on the shelf and such, but we really haven't talked about the whole retailer um, part of the business. And I'd love, for you to take a couple of minutes and tell us a little bit about where that is. Not only just because obviously supply chain affects them because they place orders, they have inventory, they're moving product, but just tell us a little bit about what we need to be thinking about on that end.
Yeah, when we look at retailers right now, it's interesting when you shadow a brand that's going in to be able to pitch to a buyer, because these buyers have so much power of being able to what to put on their shelves, and setting terms. It really starts there and trickles all the way back. And so when you have this much retail power, it creates an environment where we need to make sure that their retail buyers are also showing up for and leading the education front of being able to reach consumers. And so what I'm seeing is, these large retailers opening up, having multiple locations, right? We have, 5, 6, 7, cookies is scaling all the way to the East Coast now. And those things can be really exciting. We want to celebrate that people are having success. But I want to make sure that the retailers are being able to reach some of these operators that are really could have success if only reach their shelves. And so what I think Listo is great about is, we had talked about these legacy, genetics, and there's a lot of things that consumers have had that I'm sorry. There's a lot of genetics that I have experienced being up in the Emerald Triangle that haven't made it to some of these shelves because there's not a value on the consumer side. And I think it's really important for the retail to be able to make space for that, make space for women-owned brands, make space for equity, make space for these legacy growers and operators because they deserve to be able to have just a little section even on the shelf. I'm walking in and being able to see this is all craft sun grown. I haven't seen that in the retail space. And so until that is able to be carved out, it's kind of like a chicken and egg situation, right? Because we have consumers that are coming in and only asking for what they see on the shelves or what budtenders are recommending, which right now is very potency heavy. It's very indoor and mixed light heavy. And so I'm hoping that, more diversification when it comes to being able to what these retail stores are carrying, that they hold a lot of power in trickling down of who's really going to survive and also what consumers are going to be exposed to. Because we talk a lot about the interstate commerce of what's going to be of value outside of California. I think that we need to have a little bit more of a lens of what we really have and we're sitting with at this moment, because we could lose those genetics, we could lose those operators if we don't support them now.
But what do leave us with where you think we're going. Like, I'd love to just, if everything went according to plan and we start to use these tools, because I think also another thing about what you've created with this app is this openness to transparency, right? And there is a link between, again, technology and operations, right? The point of sale is the end piece of this. It's, how many did we sell? Maybe it gives us a little information on who purchased, and ways to communicate with the customer. But the back end on the other side is, tools like what you're creating, but also the ERP systems, right? The planning and allocation and production metrics, the initial, your accounting systems, how those things talk. And so we're at a great crossroads, um, but we also have this real need to protect where we came from. And so I'd love to just hear how you'd like to um, leave us with where we are and where we're going, and what we can look forward to.
So at Ciclo, we have this philosophy about people, process, and technology. And for us, the people are typically legacy operators, equity operators, because they bring that knowledge. They have been doing it for a long time. They have networks of their own, and they know the plant, and they really are in the right place. They've already been in the right place. Then when you look at process, we help them sort of streamline their processes, or placing all the orders in the same place, having a brand portal and being able to have your brands come in and have visibility into where things are at, being able to track how much it actually costs for you to produce something, how long it takes for you to get it where you need it to go, understanding the labor there and how you can connect other systems and with other operators to have more streamlined processes as a group, as an ecosystem. That's how we're seeing people be successful. And the technology is the backbone of all of that. So in order to understand people, process, and technology, you put the backbone of technology and link the process and the people in order to be able to understand where you are, where you're going, how much you're making, who you need to connect with, and being honest and transparent with all of your operators. And so utilizing this with Listo and being able to see it working in the real world in this beta, it's so exciting because I really am hopeful, although right now it's quite a difficult environment, that when we band together with people that are like-minded, that have the same idea of transparency and working together, that's how equity and legacy operators are going to be able to survive and also thrive, because we're a network of people that are all looking to each other to be able to build each other up, and there's room for everyone as long as we work together, and there's power in numbers. I really believe in the philosophy of like the small is all, and that the small is the reflection of the large. And if we focus on being able to bring small amounts of people, that the right people in the right place, I really believe that we can be successful and build something beautiful.
What a great way for us to close out this conversation. And I mean, that is truly a big part of why Women Empowered in Cannabis is such a important organization, because we really need to provide opportunities. We need to provide places that are building the future and that are honoring the past, but also giving people a real opportunity to move forward. Colleen, thank you for joining me. I hope we do this again soon.
Me too.
And thank you to our listeners for joining us for another episode of Inside Ops.
Thanks so much.